Hey, and welcome to the second episode of the DL show. I am sitting here with my guest Steve Sorensen, and we are going to be talking about Fomenko's chronology truth. Is that how you say it right?
It's Fomenko's new chronology.
New chronology. I'm sorry about that. Fomenko's new chronology. For those of you who probably have never heard of it, it's basically an idea that history was basically written in the 17th to 19th century, and basically what is it? Anything over 1,200 years is pretty much doctored up and made into a lie.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right. Well, yeah, this is my guest Stephen. I'm gonna let him introduce himself and his channels and give you a little short bio of his little ideas.
Thanks for having me on, Michael. Yeah, as he said, my name's Stephen Sorensen. I've been kind of looking into the Fomenko's new chronology stuff for a few years here, and I've started up a project called Chronology Truth to pretty much highlight and catalog my research into it. Right now, I'm currently publishing articles that will eventually cover all the fundamentals of the popular history, as I call it, which is what you'll learn in school, and also covering all the fundamentals of Fomenko's new chronology. And then that way I have a comprehensive knowledge of the two, and I'm able to comprehensively assess them and which one is accurate. So currently the academics will tell you that Fomenko's new chronology is incorrect, but I have yet to find an academic that has actually looked into it enough to discuss it. So I'm still looking for that academic that's looked into it and still finds issues with it. Otherwise, usually the people that have looked into it generally agree that it's pretty good for the most part, but they have issues here and there that, they're usually just personal issues. So.
Oh yeah, and for normal people like me who are very open-minded and look at things skeptically, you're never gonna find someone that's just gonna like immediately agree with it, because you're talking about tearing down complete foundations of knowledge that everyone's kind of comfortable with. And it kind of reminds me of this Voltaire quote: "It's hard to free people from the chains that they revere." Um, so I found a couple things interesting in this, and there was a quick 3-minute video on Stephen's YouTube that I watched before this, and one of the things that it brought up that I found interesting was the religious schism in the 15th century. If you could go into that a little bit more, I'm sure a lot of my audience would love to hear about that.
Right. So real quick before I dive into that, I am, like you just said, I'm on YouTube with my own channel at Chronology Truth. My base publications are at chronologytruth.wordpress.com, and I've got exclusive content on Patreon at patreon.com/chronologytruth. So I do have an article on my website that talks about the religious schisms, and it kind of goes into it a little bit more than just making the claim on that video. It's kind of like in the new chronology, the idea is that the history of religion is basically as simple as that originally people worshipped ancestors and family, and the first major religion was Christianity, and events that were based off of events of Christ's life and family. And then from there, this is around the end of the 12th century that this supposedly happened, based off of the evidence that's presented. Out of there for about 300 years until around the 1400s, 1500s is when the religion, that Christianity, starts to schism into the current religions that we see today. So the current religions that we see today didn't really take their form until about the 16th, 17th century, when the histories were being written down finally.
Okay, and obviously when you're saying the 12th century, that is to our common calendar. Obviously this has a completely different calendar, and we would be what would currently be 9th century, right?
Correct. We would be towards the end of the 9th century right now from Christ.
Okay. No, the one thing I wanted to know immediately that I kind of saved for this interview is where is the point of humans? Does it, predate the civilization? Did it take us a while to get to civilization? And where was the origin point of humans, or the Numa, so to speak?
I don't think it makes very many claims about super far origins of the human species, just because I think it recognizes the tools and limits that we have
Hmm.
to be able to look into that. But I think the track that they have set up is us migrating kind of out of like lower India and across Asia into Egypt. And Egypt is where we first developed civilization. So migrations being around maybe 800, 900 into Egypt, I think is the furthest back that we can kind of speculate based off of the written knowledge.
Oh, okay. And speaking of Egypt, obviously the pyramids there, they're claimed to. I can't even remember exactly when they were claimed to have been built. I think there's different stories of it. But why don't you tell them a little bit on what you think of the pyramids?
So in the new chronology, the epic monuments, the massive constructions that we see across the world, were all built around in between like the 14th to 16th centuries. So this is stuff like the Colosseum and the megalithic constructions at Baalbek and the Great Pyramids, the Sphinx, um, things like that were built around the 1300s to 1500s, using what is potentially known as the Philosopher's Stone, which is a
Oh.
geopolymer cement,
Hmm.
which could be used to sculpt things of massive size quickly if you just had the casing, or the whatever you wanted it to look like we
Oh,
see.
okay. Very, yeah, very, very interesting. I was trying to think of what I was gonna ask next. I had it in my head, and then it kind of escaped me. Um, now you also mentioned something about sorry, I know it's terrible. I'm doing this live. Um,
It's okay.
so who made the change in history? If there is such information out there, and why did they do it? What purpose did it serve to lie about all of human history?
So I don't think it was as much lying as it was. I would assume I'm currently at the position that it was more of it. The majority of it was mistaking.
Hmm.
As for the fundamental groundworks were mistakes that were made, but to a degree, I think that there was some forgery and some lying done as well. As just maybe a little bit later on, but like for an example, there's a character who's looking into finishing the works of Cicero in the 1300s. He's going to go and he's going to create the stories. This guy's name is Barziza. He's a Renaissance humanist, and he's going to fill in the blanks, so to say, of Cicero's life for the sake of consequentiality, so that the
Hmm.
story is continuous, based off of the manuscripts that they already had. And right after he announces that he's going to do this, allegedly, the complete works of Cicero were discovered. And he and his students got his hands on them for, I think, about 6 or 7 years, and then sent them back to where they were discovered, and now they're lost. And so our modern day translations for Cicero are based off of Barziza's translations from this now lost manuscript, which he allegedly had his hands on shortly after saying that he's gonna go out and create the manuscript that appears, which is supposedly an authentic one that we can't test to see if it's authentic or not, because it's lost.
Oh yeah, and one of the things I always say about people when we talk about carbon dating, I'm no expert in that field, but I'm sure 99% of the people that I talk to also aren't, experts on carbon dating and all these machines that they supposedly use for verification of things like that. Another question I have for you, because I'm a very big fan of classical Greek work, Plato, Aristotle, that whole era. What obviously that didn't happen, or at least it didn't happen in BC, according to
Right.
this.
Right. No, so I that does actually go in line with what I was about to cover based off of the other question you had asked. So when Barziza had done this, it was sort of close. This is the beginning of the revival of Greek and Roman studies.
Hmm.
So prior to that, most people wouldn't know who Cicero was, maybe based off of manuscripts here and there. But uh, during the Greek revival period, which was during the Renaissance, that's when all these different stories came to light.
Hmm.
I am not an expert on it, but I think it's Aristotle basically overshadows Plato until the 14 or 1500s when somebody decides that Plato in that dialogue is somebody separate beyond Aristotle or something.
Are you talking about Socrates, maybe? Because
Socrates, yeah.
Socrates was a character. You know what? I always say that too. I always kind of, I think of it looking at what we know now. Plato was the first guy with a sock account, and ironically enough, it was Socrates.
So
Um,
yeah, if it was Socrates and Plato, I recall that the scholars had initially believed they had treated the texts as just Socrates, and then later on they had created separate works just for Plato.
hmm. Interesting. Because you never know when they were really written. They're great works alone. Never mind when they were written. They could have been written 10 years ago. I don't care. They're still great works. Um, so,
So, for example, Plato, he's revived, so to say, by Gemistus Pletho,
hmm,
who's allegedly, by more recent opinion, named himself after Plato, but potentially Plato is named after him because he is Plato. He created the writings for that.
hmm, uh,
So, and he's credited as reviving the school of Plato. So, it's interesting that there's not much record of him prior to that, and then after that is when Plato's right back on the map.
hmm. And you definitely have a point there, because I mean, you talk about the Greek revival, mostly happening around the Rome and Florence area of Italy. The Medici were, a very big part of that, and a lot of the things that you see, like the School of Athens, like any kind of painting or depiction of the ancient Greeks came from that period in the Italian area, or what's
Right,
known as Italy now.
right. It's true. All the major depictions that you could think of are mostly the Renaissance era paintings from around that time,
Hmm.
1400s, 1500s, and it's more likely than not because that's when they were being revived,
Hmm.
and these stories were starting to be set in stone more. So what these people were looking at were documents from which they thought were over 1,000 years prior, but they were really only a few hundred years prior
Hmm.
to that. Events that happened in the 1100s, 1200s, and 1300s were being looked at by people in the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s.
Huh. Well, it's a lot to take in, and I wish we had enough time in one episode to go the entirety of history, because I mean this is all fascinating stuff.
Right.
And for anyone that's watching right now or later, I don't really have the two screens set up to look at the comments right now. But if you have any questions, any
Where
historical,
where are you live at? I'll pull it up on my phone.
um, well, I
Oh
clicked
yeah,
yeah,
there's that link.
I sent the link into the group chat there. So if you see any live questions, feel free to answer them, or if anyone has questions, some kind of historical event that you would like to take up and challenge against Fomenko's system, I'm sure Stephen would have no problem answering that. Take up.
Yeah, I just got your stream up, so
All
I'm
right.
looking for the comments real quick. Hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think a lot of my viewers, come later and end up watching it later. Obviously, it's good to stream just in case someone wants to catch it live, and you know.
Oh, here we go. So yeah, we do have somebody commenting. Set Theory was
All right.
commenting 6-7 minutes ago. He was actually commenting in Plato's origin. So yeah, that's Gemestus Pletho or Plethon, and he's responsible for the revival of Plato. So a lot of our modern day translations, I think, come from him because he was responsible for that. But again, like a lot of these, I don't have it super organized right now, but a lot of these ancient characters reappear around that time. And I plan on getting a concise list of the ancient characters and their medieval rediscoverer counterparts to kind of make it clear and easy to understand. Because I haven't found that anywhere. And I think personally, it's kind of odd that experts in the field haven't put this together for the public yet.
Hmm. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting theory. I'm myself, I'm not completely sold on it, but you're making a damn good argument. So, I mean, um, yeah. So, is there any other historical event that you know well that you can kind of give light to in some kind of revisionist form of how it really happened?
So, the death of Christ obviously is one of the birth and death of Christ are one of the two of the most important events in human history, I think,
Mm.
aside from the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, I think are considered the second biggest like piece of evidence for history. Um, we just had your friend comment again, set theory. He
All right.
said, so it's not a revival as he was invented as a revival. But yeah, I think what I'm saying is that it wasn't really a revival, but it really was sort of the invention or the solidification of the modern view of this character.
Mm.
So, whoever he was, I think it may be addressed, but it may be just distorted beyond recognition at this point. But the new chronology pretty much assumes that a lot of the ancient chronicles and manuscripts are about real people from real people, but through historical editing and the Reformation periods, they've attained descriptions and attributes which aren't really representative of the original finding. I forgot what we were talking about before I went to answer him.
You were talking about birth and the death of Christ being
Right. So the birth and death of Christ. That's a really interesting event because in the new chronology, there's a bit of analyzation of maps to understand kind of cartography a bit. Prior to cartography becoming a science, there was a lot of catalogs with lists of areas and distances between those areas. And when historical reformers came through, they found these lists and later put them onto maps. So, what later historians were working with weren't even geographical maps. Sometimes they were just lists. Sometimes there were maps, but they were somewhat useless because they had no directions on them, or the styles were different. So sometimes they could be upside down. If you were looking at them, you wouldn't realize it was upside down, and it could still kind of fit into another area. Um, so there's a bit of confusion from the historians on that part. And again, this is like 1500s when they were starting to kind of first attempt this. The father of modern chronology is Joseph Scaliger, and he was late 1500s, 1600s. So he's the first scientific attempt at trying to put together a chronology.
hmm.
Uh, And really, it's interesting that this putting together the chronology so far, what I've seen predates a lot of other studies that go into uh, establishing what has happened on that chronology, like paleography and radiocarbon dating and stuff.
Mhm. And another interesting thing that I saw in a quick little 3-minute video, the Crusades happened directly after the death of Jesus Christ.
Right. So Christ is killed, and directly after that, the fundamental sources, the ones that historians will use to base their opinions, say that the Crusaders were going out killing people with the same uh, spirit as punishing the people that actually killed Christ. Um, they went out in a fury to revenge Christ's death. But it wasn't much later. It was directly after to actually get the people that killed Christ, which were the royal family and the ruling class. So what happened with Christ is pretty much, from what we can determine from the records, is that this empire had expanded quickly. He was one of the royal children, and uh, a lot of people were dying from disease. Christ is one that had offered people a way not to die from the disease, and his family conspired against him and killed him. And people that had followed him and learned from his ways and survived attacked, and then there was war directly after that, to avenge what they had done to their savior, or their the person that delivered them from dying from like plagues and nasty shit, you know.
Oh yeah, whatever Jesus was to them, they were fighting on his behalf. It's almost like gang warfare. You kill my leader, and the whole crew's coming after you.
Right.
Actually, I think I like that a lot better because that makes more logical sense. You kill someone great, and then a bunch of people get pissed off and just come at you. Like that's how it really works.
So this is the turning point where it's no longer just paying respect to your elders, and it's an organized effort to honor a selected person outside of your family, uh, to honor this Christ character. But you know, the Crusades, they didn't kill all the royal family, and there were two types of Christianities that arose from this. There were people that followed Christ, which was the apostolic Christianity, uh, basically Christianity for the people. And then there was Christianity for the royal family, who believed that they themselves were gods as well, if Christ was God. And so
Hmm.
they themselves took on a deified position in their kingdom. And so these are reflected today as the Roman and Greek pantheons, and the Egyptian pantheons of gods are the relatives of Christ who fancied themselves as gods as well.
Hmm. And I wouldn't doubt that because there is also a lot of literature on the natural ordained power of kings from God around that era where you speak of like the 1400s to 1600s.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird to look into, you know, like
It really is
just
because
on the surface, it's kind of laughable, but then when you look at some of the finer details of it, you're like, huh,
yeah,
well,
you start connecting some of the dots because I mean, you know me, and everyone that knows me, they know I'm a huge political theory nerd, and it's like, I like to read things that I may not agree with, so I have, a bunch of those, natural power of kings, that those theories were everywhere from the 1300s to 1600s. There were like 6 or 7 different authors and different theories saying that God gave the right to kings and the nobility and so on.
so yeah, and those even some of the dates in that area could be wrong. People that supposedly lived in the 1300s may have actually lived in the 1400s. Um, like Dante, for example. I don't know if your mic is frozen, but your camera froze. Looks like maybe you cut out or disconnected. So yeah, I think you may need to back out. It's not showing you if you're talking on the chat. It's just shut down now. Well, I don't know where he went, but I think you might be able to hear me still. Well, I don't know where he went. Yeah, I think you can still hear me. So, um, can't remember what I was talking about. But yeah, you can check out my stuff on chronologytruth.wordpress.com. I have a ton of free information there that you can look at. I'm also on patreon.com/chronologytruth, and I've got exclusive content there for $1 a month or more. Um, I've also got options for a $20 a month one where I can write an article on a topic that you like. So I don't know if I'm still alive here or not. I might be out. Oh, it looks like I'm still alive. So yeah, I'm all over the internet. I'm on Instagram. I got funny memes on Facebook at New Chronology Memes. I got my Facebook page at Chronology Truth, on Instagram at Chronology Truth. No, this is like people, mostly like Europeans, started writing history. Uh, Scandinavians and Italians and I guess really just all over Europe, mostly. That's where the modern day opinions on history come from, is out of Europe. But as far as the current timeline it's from Joseph Scaliger and Dennis Batavius. They came up with the basic guidelines. Yeah, I'm not sure what's up with this. I'm going to try and leave and see if I can't get back in.